Howdy folks, welcome to Aliens Fireteam Elite, where today I'm going to be taking a look at an endgame Demolisher build. Now, the Demolisher is the heavy weapons class in Fireteam Elite. He has access, or she has access, because Vasquez is a thing, to the L56A3 smart gun, as well as a host of other dedicated heavy weapons. Now, bear in mind this is going to be an endgame build, so in order to make full use of what you're going to see here, you must have ranked out your Demolisher to rank 8, which is the highest rank that all of the character classes in the game can attain. The reason why that's important is because you won't have full access to any given class's complete range of perks and abilities until you reach rank 8. Before we take a look at the perks that define this particular build, however, let's take a look at the Demolisher's weapons. Like every other class in the game, the Demolisher can equip 2 weapons, but the Demolisher's weapons are rifles and heavy weapons. Let's take a look at the rifle slot, and there's only one rifle I ever use on the Demolisher because it is so incredibly good, and that's the M41A2 Pulse Rifle. And once you have 4-starred your Pulse Rifle, because all of the weapons also gain experience, just like the character classes, you get a 0.5% stability and accuracy bonus on hit, which stacks 10 times, but resets every time you reload. Wouldn't worry too much about losing that buff when you reload, because the rate of fire on the Pulse Rifle is insane, helped by things like the casket magazine. 20% fire rate, more importantly 35% maximum ammunition. Moving on to the muzzle, I use the ported compensator, again 20% fire rate and 30% firing stability, helping you keep that muzzle on target. Moving on to the optics, there are only really 2 choices in my opinion for the medium optic slot on the Pulse Rifle, the green dot sight or the red dot sight. They both provide similar benefits, but I go with the green dot sight not just because of the 20% weak point damage, but also that 30% effective range. If you have a look at the damage fall off chart at the bottom, you can see that there's very little damage fall off with this particular Pulse Rifle set up all the way out to the maximum range. So why is it that I'm only recommending this green dot and none of the others that are available? Well, I'm not recommending the hybrid optics, despite the very welcome 25% accuracy buff and the somewhat dubious passive, which gives you 10% damage, but minus 10% fire rate when you're standing still. But the main reason why I struggle to recommend the hybrid optics is because of that plus 50% zoom magnification, which means that when you aim down the sights, it zooms in the view by 50%. And that means you lose a lot of peripheral vision and situational awareness. The laser sight medium optic isn't bad. The bonus accuracy and weak point damage is obviously very useful, but the passive is again kind of dubious. Enemies are revealed for 3 seconds on hit. Now on higher difficulty settings, when there is no helpful outline around enemies, this might seem like a very good thing, but it's on hit, and if you're hitting them anyway, there's a fairly good chance you already know where they are. I'd also recommend that you stay away from the other 2 sights that I have available, the rangefinder and the illuminated optics, for the same reason that I couldn't recommend the hybrid optics. They suffer from the same problem, but worse. They replace your aim down sight completely with a zoomed in scope. So despite the benefits that they do give you in terms of accuracy, handling and effective range, I really struggle to recommend these because as soon as you use them, you lose all of your situational awareness and peripheral vision. And the green dot sight gives you better effective range anyway. Moving on to the magazine choices. There aren't really any bad magazine choices for the Pulse Rifle. The alloyed magazine, for example, gives you 25% both to reload speed and magazine capacity. The quick draw magazine with the little mag pull attachment at the bottom there gives you 20% to both reload speed and stability and features a passive effect, 20% handling for 10 seconds every time you reload. The Smart Rounds magazine, as well as giving you 10% bonuses to fire rate, stability and handling, also includes a very nice passive effect, a 20% aim assist, effectively turning the Pulse Rifle into a sort of mini smart gun. The Weighted magazine improves your magazine capacity and handling and features another passive effect, 3% stability and range on shot, which stacks 5 times up to 15% and again resets on reload. Next up, a firm favourite, and what used to be my favourite magazine for the Pulse Rifle until I got the casket magazine, is the Drum magazine. It boosts your magazine capacity by 20% and your maximum ammo by 20%, as well as featuring a 25% reload speed buff when the magazine is empty. If you were to equip the Drum magazine, your 60-round Pulse Rifle magazine would suddenly become a 72-round Pulse Rifle magazine. And that is nice. It might even give you an extra half a second of trigger time on the pulse rifle when you're firing on full auto, because the rate of fire is so ridiculous, and that's why I prefer the casket magazine. Because when I swap the casket magazine back in for the drum magazine, yes, my magazine capacity does drop from 72 to 60, but my maximum ammo skyrockets from 648 to 729, more than an entire full magazine worth, as well as giving me a little bit of extra rate of fire. And when you start playing on higher difficulty settings, intense and above, running out of ammo is a serious problem. And that's why I recommend you use the casket mag on your M41A2 pulse rifle. Moving on to the muzzle, and again there aren't really any terrible choices here, but I tend to go with a ported compensator simply because of the extra stability, and the extra fire rate doesn't hurt either, but more importantly the stability, which ensures that there's very, very little muzzle climb when you're blazing away with this baby on full auto. So that covers your pulse rifle, and you might be thinking, well hang on, this is a Demolisher build guide. I'm going to be using my heavy weapon all the time. Well, you're going to be using the heavy weapon as much as you can, but those things go through ammunition like you wouldn't believe. So let's take a look at those now. Now, despite being a maximum rank Demolisher, I have not yet unlocked all of the available heavy weapons. Some of them are available as drops for completing the various different campaign missions. Some of them you can pick up as drops from secret weapon caches hidden around the various different campaign mission levels on higher difficulty settings, and some can be purchased for in-game credits from your ship's quartermaster. As you can see here, I have the smart gun, which is the default Demolisher weapon which you start with, as well as one of the grenade launchers, and the seriously fun, but also a massive liability to the rest of your team on higher difficulty settings, Vulcan Flamethrower.
Okay, that's one incinerator down. Oh shit, there's another one. Don't run in front of me! Why would you do that?
I went for the core, with the core.
Although, to be totally fair to everyone involved, I should probably admit that that was probably the only time friendly fire from the flamethrower wasn't my fault. So anyway, moving on swiftly. There is also another grenade launcher and a rocket launcher. But honestly, the smart gun is all you need. And I'm going to show you why. Let's start by taking a look at the attachments. First, the muzzle brake. On lower difficulty settings, each and every one of these muzzle brakes does offer very tangible benefits, but as soon as you start playing on intense difficulty or higher, there is absolutely only one choice of muzzle for the smart gun, and that's the tanker muzzle brake. And that's because on higher difficulty settings, it's not all about your damage output. While that's always going to be important, what is far more important is your ability to successfully crowd control enemies, particularly very large and dangerous elites. And what the tanker muzzle brake does, as well as giving you 20% weak point damage, 10% stumble chance, which is actually not that useful on the smart gun for reasons which we'll go into a moment, and 10% effective range, it's that passive effect which is critical. It gives the smart gun a 33% chance to briefly stun enemies on hit. Now, while this effect can only occur once every 15 seconds, I cannot stress how important this is, because the rate of fire of the smart gun is so ridiculous, and it is so accurate, that this effect is basically going to be triggering on cooldown every 15 seconds. Once you have the tanker muzzle brake, every other muzzle attachment for the smart gun becomes irrelevant. When it comes to barrel attachments, however, there are more options, although you will not be picking the hammer-forged rifled barrel because of the plus 25% to stumble chance, and that's because of the way that Aliens Fireteam Elite treats these various different bonuses. They are not additive, they are multiplicative. Wow, that's actually quite hard to say. What this means in practice is that if you have a weapon like the smart gun, which already begins with a relatively low stumble chance, i.e. a chance on hit to cause your enemy to stumble, it might look as if adding 25% chance to that stumble is really good, but it's not adding 25%, it's adding 25% of whatever your existing stumble chance is. So for example, I'm not going to go from 5.5% to 30.5% by adding this rifle barrel. I'll go from 5.5% to 6.7%. I've added 25% of 5.5%, so in other words, almost completely useless. That's not to say that the hammer-forged rifling is completely useless, but you definitely won't be fitting it for the bonus stumble chance. It does have a very nice passive effect, which is basically going to be up constantly thanks to the insane rate of fire of the smart gun. 50% chance on hit that enemies will deal 20% less damage for 5 seconds. All three of the other riflings include 20% bonus fire rate. The polygonal rifling, however, has an additional passive effect, which probably isn't quite as good as the passive effect on the hammer-forged rifling, because it's only going to be up for 5 seconds out of every 15, but it does mean that enemies that you hit for that time will be doing 10% less damage to you and the rest of your team. The ratchet rifling is a very bad choice for the same reason that the hammer-forged rifling was a bad choice. Yes, it does come with 20% bonus fire rate, but that plus 30% handling bonus is completely useless because, take a look at the bottom right corner of the screen and look at the smart gun's handling bonus. 0. 30% of 0 is still 0. I tend to go with the hybrid rifling because as well as that 20% fire rate buff, it also has 30% stability, helping to keep that barrel nice and steady and ensuring that the very accurate shots always land on target. Finally, let's talk about the smart gun armature. What's the armature? Well, that's basically the gyroscopically stabilized arm that connects your smart gun, which is basically just a heavy machine gun, to your harness that you wear and linked to your targeting visor. This is what makes the smart gun smart and allows it to track targets. The smart gun's optics provide you with a targeting reticle. Just get that reticle vaguely over whatever it is you want to kill and pull the trigger, and that gyroscopic armature does the rest. I noticed in comments on previous videos some people were turned off by the implication that this game featured auto-aim. Well, it doesn't, but the smart gun does. That's why it's a smart gun. That's the way it worked in the movie, and this is the way it works in the game. My armature of choice is the deep-railed armature for two very good reasons. It gives you 30% reload speed, and the smart gun is a slow reloading weapon, so that is incredibly useful. Also, it chews through ammunition like you would not believe, and the deep-railed armature also provides a 20% bonus to your maximum ammunition capacity, although you are still going to go through this ammunition at a frightening rate on intense difficulty and higher. That is why, while the weapons that you choose and the attachments that you fit to them are obviously important, they are not as important at higher difficulty settings as the perks that you bring to the party. So let's take a look at those, because this is the meat and bones of what makes this particular Demolisher build work. This is the Demolisher perk grid. Now, bear in mind, if you just started playing the game and you're only a rank 1 Demolisher, most of these slots are going to be blanked off and unavailable. For example, if I were to take a look at my Doc character, who's only rank 1, I've basically never played him, you can see, well, he's only got very, very limited space available to slot any of those perks in. If I were to take a look at my Gunner, who's rank 3, there are some more perk slots available. These unlock as you level up the character. So, going back to the Demolisher, who's rank 8 and has unlocked the entirety of the perk grid. Each character class has 3 core abilities. In the case of the Demolisher, they are Clear the Room, Micro Rockets, and Blast Wave. Clear the Room is a passive ability. What this does, and it's very important, every time you activate any one of your other abilities, Micro Rockets or Blast Wave, you gain a stack of Clear the Room, plus an additional stack for every enemy hit. What this does is per stack, for 15 seconds, you gain 2.5% gun damage. So remember, you gain stacks of Clear the Room every time you activate either Blast Wave or Micro Rockets, plus an additional stack per enemy hit, and it stacks up to 25% bonus damage. Now for this build I've only actually attached one modifier to Clear the Room itself, and that's this one here, Quick and Dirty. What this does is whenever Clear the Room expires, the cooldowns on my other 2 abilities, Micro Rockets and Blast Wave, are reduced by 1 second for each stack that was lost. So that's anything up to a 10-second faster cooldown on my 2 active abilities. So let's take a look at those active abilities. The first is Micro Rockets. This is a shoulder-mounted mini rocket launcher. It launches 3 rockets that detonate on impact, creating a large shockwave that damages and stumbles your foes, so by default already fairly decent for crowd control. I have, however, attached one modifier to it, and that's Concussive Rockets, which launches 1 extra rocket, so 4 in total, which does a lot less damage, but now has a much bigger explosion radius that doesn't just stumble enemies, it knocks them flat on their arse. And that's where this additional perk comes in very useful, Down and Out. I now deal 20% more damage to enemies that are stunned or knocked. So the micro rockets are now going to knock them down, and you remember the tanker muzzle brake on the smart gun? That stuns anything it hits once every 15 seconds. So 20% more damage to all of that. And that is it for Clear the Room and micro rockets. Now we're going to take a look at the meat and bones, the core ability that this build is, well, built around, and that's the Blast Wave ability. This unleashes a concussive blast around you, damaging enemies and knocking them away from you. Aside from the obvious benefits of being able to knock back bad guys around you when you're playing on high difficulties and you're getting swarmed, the Blast Wave ability, when fitted out with the correct modifiers and core perks, does so much more than that. I've attached a whole bunch of modifiers directly to Blast Wave that massively increase the damage, the radius, and reduce the cooldown of the ability, which without any other modifiers increase the area of effect by 80% and reduce the cooldown by 40%. But let's talk about those other modifiers. And this is probably the big one, Assault and Battery. Each target hit by Blast Wave reduces its cooldown by 10%. So I think that by default, with the modifiers that I've already stacked, my Blast Wave has something like a 22-second cooldown. But in theory, well, in practice, if I've got 10 enemies within 15 meters of me, and I trigger the Blast Wave, it instantly comes off cooldown, and I can hit them again. And it knocks them down, and I'm doing 20% more damage to enemies that have been knocked down. And when they're knocked down, they're not doing any damage to anybody. But wait, that's not all, because with the addition of the Loud and Clear perk, not only does this give Blast Wave a bonus 20% to its damage, it also generates an additional stack of Clear the Room, the passive perk, which means that I now only need to hit 8 enemies with Blast Wave in order to reach that maximum 25% stacking damage bonus from the Clear the Room passive ability. Last, and by no means least, the Dazed and Confused perk means that not only are enemies hit by Blast Wave going to get knocked down, they're also going to be dazed, which decreases their movement speed and their damage done by 20% for 10 seconds. All of which means that with careful manipulation of the Blast Wave perk, you end up with a heavy weapons class who excels at being swarmed and surrounded by enemies. You are literally standing there yelling, "Come at me, bro!" Because the more bad guys you can get into your Blast Wave radius, the better. Bonus damage for everybody, enemies knocked down, enemies stumbled, enemies stunned when you're hosing them down with the smart gun, with the tanker muzzle brake. It's great for dealing with swarms of weaker enemies, and it's pretty damn good for dealing with the more heavily armoured enemies too, like the Warriors, the Praetorians, and the Crushers. Now, this is by no means the only way you can build your Demolisher. You can, for example, attach all of those range enhancing, damage enhancing, and cooldown reducing abilities to the micro rockets and achieve more or less the same effect. But I have found that as the difficulty levels increase, your ability to successfully keep all of those enemies at bay with the micro rockets drastically reduces. At some point you're just going to get overrun. And it's at that point where you're really going to start wishing that your Blast Wave was on a more or less instant cooldown, depending on the number of enemies that you're being swarmed by, did huge amounts of damage, knockbacks, stuns, and stumbles. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this guide, I hope you found it useful. If you disagree with any of the points that I've raised here, then by all means let us know in the comments why you think I'm wrong. If you have alternative builds that you think are equally as effective, then by all means link them down below in the comments section. In the meantime, as always, take care, have fun, and I'll catch you next time.